Anything that you let Israel get away with in Gaza, they're going to copy paste for the occupied West Bank. Bulldoze more than 70% of the city's streets in Jenin in a matter of days. They blew up homes in the Jabriyat neighborhood of the Jenin refugee camp. According to Al Jazeera's Noor Ouda, Jenin is a ghost town. All the shops are closed. Nobody is leaving their homes. Paramedics have been struggling to contact people in the camp because they've blocked the telecommunications. A sniper shot to the heart and to the head in one single child, and we would see that day after day after day. And then I saw another video of another child whose leg was about to be amputated. You could see down to the bone. We know that the aim of all of this is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That's been the aim since day one, over 76 years ago. And because they didn't finish the job in 1948, Israel has decided that now is the time to finish off occupied Gaza and the occupied West Bank. Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you're one of the Zionist actors or actresses who signed on to that letter against Bisan when you clearly can't read a book.
Great.
It's like, who actually wrote your name for you? Did you literally just tell your manager, okay? Anyway, thanks so much for listening.
This is a very long one. Before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. You can also find us on Patreon, where you get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes. You also get an additional podcast per week. It's a little more laid back. We talk politics, Palestine pop culture, and get a little more personal. We're also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So please check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod. And then I saw another video of another child whose leg was about to be amputated, and the full leg up to the hip, you could see down to the bone. And it was just open. Like it was still on, but there was just this gaping hole all the way down to the bone. And so you could see all of it, like everything, all the different layers until you get to the bone. Then I saw a separate video of that same child after the leg had been amputated. And I can't believe that there are people in this world who for the last 11 months have tried to normalize this reality and continue to tell us that, no, this needs to continue. No, we believe in Israel's right to defend itself. Well, no, they just have to defend themselves, in a better way. They have to manage the defense in a better way. They have to limit the civilian casualties. Pay close attention to the White House press briefings, because every time a spokesperson of the genocidal Biden administration is up there talking, the most that you'll get from them in terms of a concession towards Palestinian life being preserved is that Israel should limit civilian casualties. So the best that they can offer is a word saying that the killing must continue, but it should continue a little bit slower, a little bit quieter. Not because they actually care about Palestinian life, but because when the killing's just a little bit quieter, then nobody ever talks about it, because it's just a sort of amount of killing that just goes by unnoticed, right? Like think about the entire occupation before this genocide, when many people didn't even know what was happening. Palestinians were being killed every single day. And 2023, prior to October 7th, was like the deadliest year on record, going to be the deadliest year on record for Palestinians. And so was 2022 prior to that, in something like the last 15 years. Just the immense frustration and madness that I think I've been driven to a point of just almost insanity. I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, the U.S. State Department has a real Goldilocks approach to genocide, where they're like, oh, this is too many, like this is too little. We have a just right approach. And I agree. I feel like they are intentionally doing it to a point where onlookers, people who care and are invested and have family and have friends who are being shredded to death, they have to go to a place of madness. They're making life in Palestine uninhabitable, and then they're making life insufferable for everybody who has to experience it, even as an onlooker. Hezbollah has actually struck a number of military sites in the north. Over 11 military sites were struck in response. A lot of the Iron Dome, the technology like the radar systems, the stuff that makes the Iron Dome function and makes it so that it can track incoming missiles, incoming drones, is not operable right now. It is not functioning because of a sustained military campaign by Hezbollah.
Yeah, and you know what that means? That means more brutality, because anytime there is more resistance against Israel, there is so much more brutality against Palestinian civilians. That's what they do. And they do that intentionally to put pressure on those resisting. And that is textbook terrorism. Moments ago, before we logged on, Israel bombed the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza. It's not the first time they've bombed that hospital. It's certainly not the first time they've bombed hospitals. If you've been following us over the last 11 months, we have reported extensively on the total destruction of the Gazan healthcare system as a result of sustained Israeli attacks, the Israeli siege as well, and the uninterrupted evacuation orders by Israel to evacuate Palestinian patients, civilians who are sheltering there from these hospitals so that they can be bombed. There have been dozens of these evacuation orders in recent days. People are literally walking in circles with nowhere to go, asking the same question, where are we supposed to go to be safe? And the so-called safe zone, which in any event continues to get bombed itself, continues to shrink even smaller and smaller and smaller as the majority of Gaza is now no longer considered safe and under evacuation orders. I think the last time I checked, it was like over 80% of Gaza was a zone which Israel admits it was bombing. So that's very troubling. After many weeks of the WHO and international community rallying for Israel to allow Palestinians to be vaccinated against polio, which Israel initially said no to, they allowed polio vaccines to enter Gaza, because if you're following, you will have certainly heard that a 10-month-old had tested positive for polio and then shortly thereafter became paralyzed. But even though the WHO, according to Al Jazeera, reached 640,000 children in this campaign, which is officially set to start on Sunday, September 1st, the point is that in any event, this is essentially irrelevant, because what is the point of vaccinating the children of Gaza if you are continuing to starve them and bomb them? And I saw somebody with, I think, a very astute take on X say that polio vaccinations are not intended to protect Palestinian children who continue to be killed in any event every single day. They're intended to protect Israeli children, because polio doesn't know if you're Palestinian or Israeli. And the sheer proximity of polio now to Israel means that actually Israelis are now at risk for this. And so in order to protect themselves, they allow now the polio vaccine to enter Gaza. But of course, it's not to protect the Palestinian children, because they will continue to be killed in any event. And then all of this comes on the heels of Israel having killed Medo Halimy, which was a really dark day. I come across his account a couple of months ago on Instagram, and I remember thinking to myself, what a just like totally bright, positive, creative guy, you know, who just tried to do everything he could to still maintain a routine during a genocide, you know, displaced from his home. He's got his backpack, he's got his laptop. He's trying to make content every single day. He's trying to show the world how he lives, and he's doing it with so much intention and like in such like a forward-looking way to the future. One of the last videos he made, of course, is the video where he was showing the world his garden, and he said that he was going to plant every day because planting brings life, and Palestinians create life while they only know how to destroy life. And so for him, that was an act of resistance. That's what he said. And then, you know, we got the news that Israel had killed him. He was on the beach with his friends, and Israel bombed Palestinians on that beach. and a piece of shrapnel from the missile hit his brain. He went into the ICU, fell into a coma, and died. 19-year-old kid, his whole life ahead of him. Generations of Palestinians could have come from him if he was allowed to live on this earth. They wiped out a lineage by wiping him out, because then I started to think about like him as this patriarch, 80 years old with his entire family with him, just the beauty that he would have created if he was allowed to live. And he wasn't allowed to live because there are people who are deciding that Palestinians must be killed in the most brutal ways possible. And those people have power, and they are gaslighting you, telling you that you have to vote for them. You have to vote for them. They're talking about joy, and they're talking about voting, and they're talking about the other side being worse. And I'm sitting here like, is it like, are you guys... This is the scariest horror movie I've ever seen.
They're like, the other guy promises a double genocide.
I don't have words for what I'm witnessing. And so many people keep saying that as well. It's like they don't have words to describe this. If language exists, because at some point in time, humans decided that they needed a word for this thing, that's how language evolves over time, going back to the very beginning when, they first named the first thing. And then everyone knows like that fun trivia fact about how Eskimos have like 1 billion words for ice, because that's what's in their surroundings. And so they have coined different terms for different types and different textures and different whatever. There is no word for this because this has never existed in this way, where it's out there for everyone to see in this way. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying genocide has never been practiced before. I'm just saying we've never seen it like this. And we've also never seen it with these weapons. So it's the combination of the weapons and the access to the reality that is completely unique. And the duration, all of that together, plus the gaslighting in real time, right? And then the repression. So now New York University has apparently updated its code of conduct to protect Zionism and Zionists.
Yeah, they're considering it a protected class. And next year's protected class members include the KKK and ISIS, I believe.
So let's see what Palestine Legal had to say about this, because I always trust them for legal analysis when it comes, especially to repression against students. They're really good on that. So they said on X, in a dangerous escalation of repression, New York University announced a new student conduct policy last week that appeared to prohibit criticism of Zionism. Here's what you need to know. If implemented, so apparently it's not been implemented yet. If implemented, these policies risk creating a hostile environment for Palestinian and anti-Zionist Jewish students and severely curtail the free expression of all students. The policy directly conflates Zionism and Judaism by stating that the former is a code word for the latter. It goes on to treat Zionism as a protected class on its own, a status afforded to no other political ideology. Look how far, this is my commentary, look how far the supremacy goes, that they're starting with this political ideology over any other. This is the first university that we are aware of that claims that Zionist is an identity, meriting protection under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, rather than a political ideology used to justify apartheid and genocide. The immediate impact of this policy and others like it will be to chill dissent on campus related to the U.S.-Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. New York University for Justice in Palestine group has stated that it represents an intensification of NYU's year-long effort to censor pro-Palestine activism. This will disproportionately impact Palestinian and anti-Zionist Jewish students, all of whom may be accused of conduct violations for engaging in political expression or relaying personal narratives and experiences. Again, my sidebar, literally retelling your life story and engaging in commentary is now going to be a violation of this code of conduct, again, if this policy is implemented. They finally say it also opens the door, as you said, Michael, for other ethno-nationalist ideologies to claim protection from criticism. With Zionism enshrined as a protected class, there's no reason why Hindu nationalism, Christian nationalism, white nationalism, or similar ideologies wouldn't be afforded the same.
They're like, hey, I was from Rhodesia, so that's now a protected class. And if you want to argue with me, I've got a Rhodesian Ridgeback to introduce you to. Using the Civil Rights Act, can you imagine how upset those black people who sat at counters would be to find out that the law that they helped inspire is being used to justify a genocide? A US funded, backed, supported genocide?
It's crazy.
The Civil Rights Act, Title VI, is meant to be like, you're not allowed to discriminate employment. You're not allowed to discriminate like housing. You know, these things still exist, obviously, through redlining and other, mechanisms that they've used. But ostensibly, the Civil Rights Act is meant to protect people, people who are being marginalized by the society, by the institutions. And then you have basically the most powerful group of people who are the most influential in our political system, Zionists, right? Through APAC, being protected at this university through the Civil Rights Act. It's like the people who were discriminating against black people trying to sit at the same counters being like, we're a protected class. It's like white supremacists. It is white supremacists. It's white supremacists being like, we are a protected class. And that's why you can't criticize genocide. It's also falls in line with Meta's new policy.
Correct. So I think that happened in July, where they expanded their hate speech policy to remove more posts targeting, quote, Zionists. They said that they would remove content attacking Zionists when it is not explicitly about the political movement. Now, of course, that's what they say. But in any event, we know that our posts get removed all the time for mentioning Zionists or Zionism.
When is there a mention of Zionists that's not political? Where is there an apolitical Zionist?
Right.
That literally doesn't exist.
Correct. And it also leaves them with the discretion to be able to say, oh, well, we found that this was a code word. It's up to them. And you have to then engage in that whole appeals process. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think it's just like the premise I will never get over just because of how bad the logic is. But the idea that your identity protects you from being able to be held accountable for mass atrocities. Like, it can't be a genocide because the people carrying it out are cosplaying as Jewish. It's the worst argument I've ever heard.
Guys, the yarmulke's not fooling anybody anymore. The yarmulke keeps falling off because you're busy committing genocide.
Right.
The yarmulke's not on because it doesn't fit under a ski mask.
Right. Which is why the rapist who carried out the rape of the Palestinian man
and is now being paraded around Zionist television as some celebrity.
That guy, he took off his ski mask to put on the yarmulke on TV, right? So that's weird. In a video where he's calling on his fellow Zionists to support him because he's the victim, right? The guy who carried out the rape is the victim. Weird world. And by the way, not a single word from the US administration on the gang rape of Palestinian hostages in the torture facilities. Not a single word.
And you see those fucking idiots get up on the podium at the State Department, and reporters are like, hey, have you seen footage of Palestinians being violently gang raped in this concentration camp? And then they're like, yes, we have seen the video. It's just, we are working with our partners.
Working with our partners. That's my favorite line.
And it's like, okay, what do you talk, like, what do you guys, what does work mean to you?
What Matthew Miller said about that incident, I have to pick it back up. So this was earlier in the month in August. What he said was that he called on Israel to investigate. Typical line. They say it all the time. But in this case, there's a video. Like, there is a video. What?
Also, the guy the rapist was hailed as a hero by one of the high level, it was either Smotrich or Ben-Gvir, one of those fucking fascists who is in the one of the highest levels of the Zionist government, called on them and praised them as heroes. And so it's like, it appears that they did investigate it and found that they approved.
Yes, and you wouldn't call him a hero if there was any doubt that he had done it.
You wouldn't call him a hero if you didn't know what happened.
Right. So, like, you're calling him a hero because you know that he did it, and you're saying that, well, it's justified. Because remember, that's the debate that's happening in the Knesset. They're saying, no, it's justified. You should be allowed to rape Palestinians because they're Palestinian. No, I'm just, like, my brain's going to explode.
Yeah, it would appear that they have investigated it because they came to the conclusion that the guy who raped somebody is a hero, right? So they kind of know what happened.
And by the way, let's expose him. His name is Meir Ben Shitrit. His name is literally Shitrit, like shit, R-I-T. So not great. But yeah, it's wild. Mondoweiss published an article about how this guy is now a media star.
I mean, is he a member of Knesset yet? They're like, this guy they are knighting this fucking rapist, and they're like, this guy's got the it factor.
Right.
The it factor being like an electric rod, I guess.
And by the way, this guy asserts that he's innocent. And he also said on one of the shows that the military prosecutor and the whole nation should, quote, kiss our hands, quote, since the forces behave so ethically, doing, quote, holy work. And by the way, this is a guy who in June 2023, when he was serving as a reservist in the occupied West Bank, posted a video saying, quote, why can't we go in with Negev machine guns? Why can't we go in with mag machine guns? Why can't we go in with the holding force of a grenade launcher to such a place full of terrorists? 2 days ago, all the terrorists were standing there, 200 armed terrorists. Why don't we get 34 attack helicopters in the sky and spray everyone?
He's talking about the strategy for the Nova Music Festival.
And then he says, quote, the whole nation of Israel, right, left, religious, secular, quote, has these wishes. So,
and we know that's true.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thanks for just confirming that one for us, because
you know that song where it's like, I know that's right.
And in the last couple of days, Israel has launched a massive invasion of the occupied West Bank. Many months ago, we reported to you that the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention had issued a genocide warning for the occupied West Bank. Basically, since October, I've been posting, and other Palestinians have been posting and writing, saying anything that you let Israel get away with in Gaza, they're going to copy paste for the occupied West Bank. And Israel decided that no time is better than the present, and they launched an attack several days ago on the occupied cities of Jenin and Nablus and others. The deadly siege of Jenin, for example, has left Palestinians there without food, water, electricity, or internet. It is being described as the most intense military raid in the occupied West Bank in decades, since 2002. Listen to this. They have, according to Al Jazeera, bulldozed more than 70% of the city's streets in Jenin. How have they done that in a matter of days? 70% of the city's streets? Not only are they copy and pasting exactly what they have done in Gaza, but they are doing it at a rate that is even far more accelerated than what we have seen in Gaza. They razed 70% of the streets in Jenin in a matter of a few days. This should chill everyone's bones. Apparently, 80% of Jenin and the entire refugee camp have now been cut off from water supplies because Israel has destroyed the distribution networks. And they have killed dozens. Last I checked, the death toll in Jenin for 4 days has been 22 Palestinians.
The occupation has also sustained a few casualties. I saw a video of them having to medevac at least 1 or 2 soldiers.
Let's be also clear about what's the aim of all this. We know that the aim of all of this is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That's been the aim since day one, over 76 years ago. And because they didn't finish the job in 1948, Israel has decided that now is the time to finish off occupied Gaza and the occupied West Bank. And you had even an Israeli foreign minister, Israel Katz, call for the, quote, temporary evacuation of Palestinians from areas in the northern West Bank, under the guise of it being a measure to protect civilians. We've heard this before. We've seen this before. We know how this plays out. That's what they told the Palestinians in 1948. That's what they told Palestinians in 1967. That's what they told Palestinians in Gaza in November when they expelled the majority of the population and turned Gaza into a tent city like they promised they would. So now they're applying that same practice to the occupied West Bank, where they're starting to call for quote unquote evacuations. They're starting to call for just temporary displacement. They just pepper the media with these things until the world gets used to it, and then they carry it out, right? Because you've been hearing about it for weeks. And so then you've just become accustomed to the language. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I heard there was going to be this displacement. I heard there was going to be this evacuation. And so now they're just testing the ground for the language in the media. Just wait a week or two before it starts being carried out in mass.
Yeah, we all know that their main priority is safety.
Right.
They're big safety folks. That's why they keep dropping 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps.
They blew up homes in the Jabriyat neighborhood of the Jenin refugee camp. According to Al Jazeera's Noor Oda, Jenin is a ghost town. All the shops are closed. Nobody is leaving their homes. Paramedics have been struggling to contact people in the camp because they've blocked the telecommunications. There was a good article about how media can be held accountable, legally accountable for genocide.
So the media plays a vital role in facilitating genocide. It would be impossible for the occupation, for the United States, for Germany, for anybody to commit genocide without the complicity of the media of its time, right? That's why the Nuremberg trials, some of the first people who were tried were media journalists, propagandists, spread the word of genocide, basically, to cover genocide from the genocider's perspective, from a sympathetic perspective to the genociders. And I think that's why we're noticing a change in the tone of some of the major media outlets. They're not like fairly or accurately portraying Palestinians as they ought to be, but they've moved away from like full-throating genocide. Piers Morgan has gone from "Do you condemn?" to "Well, I can kind of see what's going on over there." And it's like it's a slow shift to the middle for these media talking heads, because they recognize that they could potentially face charges for having facilitated a genocide.
Yeah. So let's look at this topic a little bit closer. On August 24th, Craig Mohiber published an article in Mondoweiss, Western media can be held legally accountable for its role in the Gaza genocide. And he takes us back to 76 years ago when delegates gathered at the newly established United Nations to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He notes that front and center was this notion that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and that this includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek and receive and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. But that in parallel to this, in another UN conference room, delegates were gathered to create the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And there too, they were also aware of the danger of speech that dehumanizes and incites. And that's because the Genocide Convention, which we've also covered quite in detail on the pod, actually contains provisions that criminalize not just the act of carrying out genocide, but also the acts of incitement to genocide and complicity in genocide. And these prohibitions, the prohibition, for example, on the incitement of genocide, apply not only to states, but also to private actors as well. And incitement, we know, largely takes place through language, right? And as you said, Michael, there is a precedent for this through convictions in the Nuremberg Tribunal. So publisher Julia Streicher was prosecuted for incitement and persecution on political and racial grounds. The court found that his media publication, Der Strömer, continued to publish articles that included, quote, incitement to murder and extermination, even while he was aware of the horrors that were being perpetrated against European Jews by Nazi Germany. 50 years after that, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda would convict 3 media personalities for their role in inciting the Rwanda genocide. During sentencing, the judge admonished the perpetrators. He said, "You were fully aware of the power of words, and you used the medium of communication with the widest public reach to disseminate hatred and violence without a firearm, machete, or any physical weapon. You caused the death of thousands of innocent civilians." So when Palestinians are sharing on social media, for example, that the New York Times is dripping in the blood of Palestinian children, that's not like an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. That's not just us like having, an emotional response. There's actual legal precedent for exactly that. The notion that media is dripping in the blood of thousands of civilians. Judges have used that language before. So please understand that. This is not just some comment on social media. CNN, Fox News, BBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, all of these outlets know exactly what they're doing. And they should be very wary given these historical precedents.
An example that stands out to me is the Wall Street Journal article, "Why Israel Must Take Rafah," on the day of the Rafah invasion. I mean, that's just one of many. Like, anybody who wrote about like rape or anything on October 7th, anybody who did anything like that, they're obviously culpable as well. Anybody who reported the extreme lie of 40 beheaded babies with absolutely no proof, right? Even when the Israeli military walked that back, you still have journalists in the West who are repeating this debunked lie.
Yeah, how about Sky News? When they said that a stray bullet found its way into a van and killed a Palestinian girl.
A bullet doesn't find its way anywhere. A bullet is aimed at something, and then somebody makes the conscious decision to pull a trigger at the thing that they aimed at.
I love how we have to sit here and explain how guns work.
A bullet found its way into JFK's head, Elia.
The article goes on to speak about how if your only source of information is mainstream Western media, you would actually have no idea that Israel's on trial for genocide at the ICJ, or that Israel's leaders are the subject of arrest warrant requests for crimes against humanity at the ICC. You've also probably never heard of the hundreds of statements of genocidal intent by the highest government officials in Israel. You will probably still believe, as you've said, Michael, the stories about the beheaded Israeli babies, which were long proven to be fabricated, and unaware of the fact that hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinian babies have actually been beheaded. And in many cases, we have photo or video proof of those beheadings, sometimes on a daily basis, it seems. You would also not know about the torture camps, the systematic rape of Palestinian hostages. You wouldn't know about the fact that there's Israeli snipers targeting small children in Gaza, like the American doctors who went to Gaza and said, "But how do you explain the sniper shots to the head and the heart?" Like a sniper shot to the heart and to the head in one single child. And we would see that day after day after day. That's Dr. Perlmutter, who went to Gaza. He goes on to comment how false Israeli disinformation and propaganda are regularly and uncritically published in Western media to justify the crimes against Palestinians and to distract from what Israel's doing in its campaign of extermination, whereas stories covering the genocide are censored. I heard that the BBC actually, as an editorial policy, is not allowed to use the word Palestine. They can speak of Palestinians, but they don't use the word Palestine. And that's a rule that comes up over and over in mainstream media all the time. Reporters are also apparently instructed not to mention, quote, occupied territory or refugee camps. They speak of refugee camps as densely populated areas, right? They try to shape the reality in such a way that you wouldn't actually ask yourself the question of what happened to these people. Like, if you know that there's refugee camps, the next logical question would be, okay, but why are so many Palestinians in refugee camps? Where were they living before? Where was the place where they weren't refugees, where they were just like regular folk? And then they became refugees. What was that place? And then you would know the answer was Israel built itself on top of their homes and land, making them refugees, preventing them from going back. And then you might start to feel differently about the project. It may never happen, right? This whole prosecution of media may never end up happening. But I think that's not so much the point, right? Because whether or not Palestinians are able to achieve accountability for the full scope of the crimes that have been committed against us is a pretty big open question. And I'm willing to bet it probably won't happen. There will be some accountability, but there won't be accountability for everything, right? But that's not the point. The point is to say that they're engaging in crimes when they write these articles, whether or not they're held accountable. I hope that they are. I hope that every single one of them that sat down to write these stories for the last 76 years, and including in particular the last 11 months, are held accountable. But the bigger point here is to understand that when we are so angry about what we're reading, it's because it's leading to our killing, and the killing of our families, and the killing of children, and the killing of beautiful souls like Medo Halimy. That's why it matters. Language is extremely, extremely important, and to misuse it is criminal because it results in mass violence against a people who are desperate to be free. I think one of the biggest tools of dehumanization in language is the narrative of Iran-backed. Iran-backed this, bringing Iran into discussions when we're talking about the Palestinian people who are occupied, who are colonized, who are being genocided, who are subjects of an apartheid regime. Because Iran has been so demonized that anytime you hear Iran-backed anything, you just go, oh yeah, okay, well, yeah, of course. Of course they have to die. It's the big, it's the bogeyman.
Yeah, it obviously associates the Palestinian cause with America's so-called number one biggest enemy, which people have been propagandized for to accept, for many years. But on top of that, it also robs Palestinians of agency, right? Because it presupposes the idea that, oh, Palestinians aren't calling the shots for themselves. Like, they never have and would control their own autonomous space. It's always been some other power, whether it's the British Mandate or the occupation or the Ottoman Empire, who controls Palestinians. Like, the Zionists could never conceptualize or believe that Palestinians are actually at the helm of their own destinies, that Palestinians are the ones who are making the decisions about what happens in the future in Palestine, about facts on the ground, about reality. Palestinians are the ones. Iran doesn't live in Gaza. You know what I mean? The people of Iran do not live in the West Bank. Like, the people who are living under occupation in Palestine are the ones who are making these decisions. And Zionists cannot conceptualize that because they've never viewed Palestinians as human beings capable of making their own decisions.
Along those lines, it erases the reality that this is a freedom movement, that this is a struggle against occupation and colonialism, that we are fighting for our rights, right? That we're fighting for the realization of our rights, which are guaranteed to us under international law, but which we have been deprived of. That narrative is entirely missing from mainstream media. It doesn't exist. The only time you hear it is if you listen to the Palestine Pod, you listen to independent media, you read independent media like Mondoweiss, like Electronic Intifada, like others who allow you to hear from Palestinian voices, right? It's the only time you hear that. You don't hear that narrative in any of these other spaces. Because if you were to hear that this was about a people who have been deprived their rights, the next logical question or step might be, why can't they have their rights? Like, just give them their rights. Why do they continue to be deprived of their rights? And Israel can't do that because then it wouldn't be Jewish.
And to speak about the importance of media in shaping public perception and the crackdown of independent media, there's been a tremendous effort to censor high-profile voices who speak about and provide information, accurate information about Palestine, right? Resistance News Network is the Telegram channel where people can find the most up-to-date, accurate information from Palestinians on the ground. It was recently banned in the EU. UK-based journalist Richard Medhurst was arrested coming off of a flight in Heathrow Airport, and they refused him his right to contact anybody in order to intimidate him and stop him from continuing his journalism. The Cradle Media was banned from Instagram. They recently added another account, but they had a body of work that was built up and their entire account was disappeared. That adds them to accounts like Within Our Lifetime and Nardine Kiswani, as well as Propagandaverse Truth, who have all been permabanned. My comrade CoinTelHo also had her account suspended. The CEO of Telegram, where people are getting this accurate information about Palestine, has been arrested in France. Bisson obviously was nominated for an Emmy for the documentary about the genocide, and over 150 Zionist celebrities wrote a letter trying to censor her. And all of this at a time when the occupation has killed over 160 journalists since October 7th. And you're probably thinking, like, isn't killing one journalist a war crime? And it is. It is absolutely a war crime.
Do you remember also Germany threatened Ali Abu Ni'ma, who's the founder of the Electronic Intifada, with prison for a talk he gave over Zoom?
So, there's what I would say a conspiracy to silence the folks who are outspoken about Palestine, who are trying to provide accurate information about Palestine. And that is because knowledge is power, right? Being able to have access to the right information allows people to make informed decisions. And what the American electorate relies on is an ignorant public. They want you to be all Krispy Kremed up, right? So that when they put boots on the ground in Palestine, you're like, I mean, I don't care. All I know is high fructose corn syrup. Like that's what they want. Anyways, stay vigilant and fuck the U.S. government.
We can say that.
Okay, well, then in that case, pick up arms again.
Jokes.
No, obviously, I'm a comedian. Everything I say on this podcast is a joke, usually. Folks, that has been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at @thepalestinepod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. And look for us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/palestinepod. That's been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can. Okay. Hey, well,
we had a great review.
Yeah. Shout out to the review that we got recently that said you radicalized my apolitical partner.
It was written so beautifully because the title of the review was The Unachievable. And I was like, what? And then she was like, lol. I don't know why I just assumed it was a woman. Maybe not. Maybe it's a guy who's like, you radicalized. I don't know. Lol. I think you may have radicalized my apolitical partner. Blue Goose Flies. Shout out to Blue Goose Flies on Apple Podcasts.
Hey,
thank you.
Anybody can radicalize somebody who's already plugged in. Are you radicalize somebody who literally isn't even registered to vote?
No, that's pretty good. So
anyway,
leave us a review. We love to see it. Thank you guys so much. See you next time. We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.